Hi everyone, it's Anna Covert. We did it. We just reached 100,000 subscribers on YouTube. I can't believe that we've achieved this milestone. It is because of you and your aloha. So please continue to subscribe if you haven't already. Share this content with your friends and family so we can continue to attract more wonderful guests to share their vision and knowledge with us on the Covert Code Podcast. This week, we're celebrating the 100th episode with Katie Goar. And I know you're just going to find her as intriguing and captivating as I did. Her TED Talk is one to watch for sure. So please stay tuned. If you want to learn more, you can reach thecovertcode.com. And I will see you this week in the Pixels. Aloha. Aloha, my name is Anna Covert, and I'm coming to you from my battleship here on the beautiful island of Oahu. This week on the Covert Code, the topic is leadership that lifts, not labels. My special guest is Katie Goar, president of Quadel and an advocate and leader nationally recognized for her work in public housing and community development. In 2024, Katie took the stage and delivered a powerful TEDx speech about how you can offer a hand up, not hand out, and it can really change lives. I actually teared up when I watched the TEDx. It was beautiful. You will get more into that in a little bit. She's also the podcast host of ChangeMakers, which is a Forbes partnership that dives into innovation in the public or all housing, I guess, landscapes. I know your story is deeply personal, and it started when you were just 11 years old from a personal experience with, having housing inconsistencies, and how, that was a perspective that really, shaped your future, but did not, well, let me start over.
You're good.
Right.
I like it. In
Oh,
fact,
yeah.
I meant to ask you whether, if, I don't know, whatever happens, I'm like, should I just pause and restart and you'll clip it in post? Or are we like all one feed, get it right on the first take?
I usually record. I try to memorize the beginning, and then we go into questions. And if you ever want to, we can totally edit. If you're like, don't like your answer or whatnot, we can stop in the middle of that. I just usually have like an opening that is
Yeah. Okay. But like, for some reason, if I'm like, oh, wait, hold on, I messed that up.
right. Or if you like, I get too hot and you like need to like pad yourself.
Got it. Okay. Good. That works. Yes. Quadel.
Quadel, right?
Quadel. Think of four like quad, like Quadel. Yes.
Quadel. Okay, cool.
Yeah.
That's what I'm done. Okay, take two. Aloha, my name is Anna Covert, and I'm coming to you from my battleship here on the beautiful island of Oahu. This week on the Covert Code, the topic is leadership one more time. Aloha, my name is Anna Covert, and I'm coming to you from my battleship here on the beautiful island of Oahu. This week on the Covert Code, the topic is leadership that lifts, not labels. My special guest is Katie Goar, president of Quadel and a nationally recognized leader in public housing and community development. In 2024, Katie took the stage in a powerful TEDx that really focused on how offering a hand up, not a hand out, can really change lives. It was deeply touching, and we're going to talk more about it soon here as we dive in. She's also the host of the ChangeMaker podcast in partnership with Forbes, which really talks about innovation in the housing landscape. Her story is deeply personal and started at just 11 years old when she experienced housing instability, and how that shaped her perspective but did not change her or shape her future. So I'm really excited to dive in today and, just talk about her passion and how we can apply this in our regular day-to-day business. Thanks so much for being here, Katie.
Thank you for having me. It is a pleasure and an honor. Even though I do have a podcast, I think I'm still nervous as a guest. So, but you create a great forum. So thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much for that. So just to dive right in, I was just watching your TEDx, and my daughter is just 11 and a half years old. So it was so emotional for me to hear your story. And could you give it our team or our listeners here the little cliff notes of, how you got from there to where you are right now, and kind of some of these concepts to get ourselves started?
Well, the whole TEDx experience is both amazing and daunting. And I got up on a stage and shared for pretty much the very first time, especially to people I had worked with for nearly 2 decades, and they had no idea about my backstory or how I grew up. And so I had just kind of kept that and tucked it away in my pocket. And for a variety of reasons, a little bit of being ashamed of my early years and also not feeling like I was pedigreed enough to be in the position that I was if people knew about that. And also, ironically, when me and my brother and my two sisters were young, we actually made a pact that we would never talk about being homeless. And we did it at the time that we were homeless as a self survival technique. We didn't want to talk about it openly in case somebody would hear and take us away from each other.
Right.
And but when we made that pact emotionally, it just stayed with us. Like even when in our 30s and our 40s, and so here we are all in our 50s, we still hadn't talked about it. We still hadn't
Wow.
told people. And so I'm getting up on this TEDx stage and talking about it literally for the first time in front of my coworkers, even with my family. My brother and sisters flew out, and we just confronted it, and it was very good for several reasons, but again, it was also daunting. Um, Beautiful experience though, and I look back on that because it did a couple things for me. Um, it actually let me talk openly about affordable housing. And, I say that it is a hand up, not a handout. And I talk about what the stability of a home did for us. And I go there and I say what it was like living in a tent, how we were preparing food while living in a tent. We didn't have a kitchen, didn't have a bathroom, didn't really have a bed unless you kind of count the floor, sleeping bags, and a cot as a bed. So I went through and I talked about it, both from like that macro level of what housing can do, and then also that real deep personal level about what it was like being homeless and having instability at such a young age. When you listen to it, especially having a child the same age that I was when I was going through it, like you can't really even imagine.
No, I mean, it was like I
Yeah.
when you said that you had run away and you were, you were recycling and using, when you ran away, you went down to the gas station and got like a soda
Yep.
drink, and I just
Yep.
thought I'll even let my daughter go walk home from school, or she's now in sixth
Right.
grade, and I mean, just the how fragile it is, but I really appreciated what you said about how let these things. It's a chapter, it's not the story. Yeah, because when I grew up, I guess you're never not dyslexic. You can be homeless and not homeless, but you're always dyslexic, right? um, but that was something that I kind of always struggled with and couldn't read out loud when I was a child, or but I was smart, but I didn't follow the same norm as everyone else. But that's very public. Everyone can see that all the time, right? In class, but it did to make it easier to talk
Mhm.
about, right? And so
Right.
I think that there is that kind of fine line between what is out there for others to judge us on and what we judge ourselves for, and the bringing together, the merger of that later in life, and how that becomes our passion. Like for me,
Mm.
fairness is really something that I care about. Why I wrote my Forbes book about digital advertising and
Mhm.
to protect people from fraud, and here you are helping those try to get security.
Mhm.
Yeah,
And,
out.
the tagline is, from being homeless to housing CEO, which, is ironic. Um, but yet it is speaking to the core of safety. It is speaking to the core of adequacy. It is speaking to the core, just like you mentioned, of, wait, this isn't normal, right? Like I'm not fitting in. This is not good. This is hard. This is unfair, right? Like,
Yep.
as a 12-year-old, 11-year-old, I'm like, this is not how life should be right now.
Right.
And each of us, there's so many people that have some type of stigma, that have had, some adversity, because you're not going through life without adversity. And yet, where there seems to be this turnaround moment is to say, am I going to use this to just sit here in this moment and deal with the bitterness, and the unfairness of it, the trauma of it, quite frankly? Or am I going to move through this and try to acknowledge it, handle it, deal with it, and then possibly use it?
Yes.
Or what you think, I said what I thought was going to be my biggest negative became my strongest positive. And can you move to that place? And then for the added win to say, then can I help others?
Yes.
Right? Can I turn around and now use this, not just for myself, but can I start helping others? And that is a journey that I would never have guessed I would be on. And, you know, do you go through some of that pain? Would you have wanted to do that? No, nobody wants to go through that adversity and pain. But I'm also not going to have gone through it and then not try to get some good from it, right? Not try to
Right.
provide some good for myself and for others. And man, when you think about that piece, um,
Isn't
then
that what,
that's
like,
where,
that's it.
oh,
That's like
right,
the whole
right,
life too. Without the challenge, there's not the way to evolve, right? And to
right,
overcome. And I think,
right.
when you really get the story from your perspective, it's like then you see it through that lens. You had those glasses on. So
Yeah,
no one can tell you that you don't know how it works, right?
mhm,
You lived through it, and people listen more, right, to that
right, right.
perspective.
And I mean,
Yeah.
even from a business perspective too, I mean, there's so many things that I look back and I'm like, actually, this was preparing me. Again, I have to keep, the guilt, the shame, the bitterness in check, right? But this was also preparing me to be able to lead better, to be
Right.
able to advocate better, for me to be able to accept risk better, to inform my decision making on who we partner with as a company, who we hire as a company. And so this was actually one of, this was a good training ground to where I am now, as hard of a training ground as it would have been.
Yes, it's like, are you going to be a victim or not,
Mhm.
right? And I think that's the thing. It's like, and we see that even now. It's interesting. So I live in Hawaii, and here I don't know if you know much about the housing market here, but it is very expensive to live in Hawaii and there's been a huge motion of people who are getting, they call it, like, um, you know, priced out of paradise,
Yeah.
right? Or and what are your thoughts on, the difference of, because one of the biggest things we hear, right? And it's on the news, and, oh, the homeless, and they're back, and they're going to be evacuated again from these areas, and people are cheering for it. And I have a hard time with that, because it's like, where are they going to go? Right?
Hmm.
Where are these people going to go? And oh, well, they're there are places, but they're mentally disabled. Well, but
Hmm.
what are your thoughts, being an industry leader, of what we're going to do? Because there are people of all different types that are in this situation. There are
Yeah.
people like your family, was they were not mentally unstable. There was
Yep.
just, and so, like, people will be putting all these labels on people.
Yep.
And
Yep.
what is the solution there to really, I mean, without judgment, but like really
Mhm.
providing the right care, because we don't have a
Right.
solution for these people.
Right. And speaking to our specific situation, we did not have substance abuse and we did not have mental issues that were um, what our facts were. It was a financial distress. It was financial implosion, and single mom with 4 kids couldn't afford anything. And
Right.
so out of desperation, we were living in a tent. And we were there for quite a while, even until it started snowing. And so, I can speak to our situation. It was a difficult time. There was not access. There was to housing that we needed, and we were not able to financially afford it. And so that's a dynamic that a lot of people are experiencing, though.
Right.
What can you afford, and can you find something? Affordability, accessibility are a challenge no matter why you got there.
Right.
Okay.
Yes.
Those are still real challenges. And you even have people who are working who are homeless. And what I speak to in the TED Talk is, let's talk about the families with children who are homeless. And so that kind of is really what is driving a lot for people to recognize there are working people, people with children who are homeless. And the solution, though, so what you're asking is there are communities where we're providing housing for homeless, even for people with addictions, for people with mental health issues, and lack of community support. There are certain cities who are doing this very, very well.
Mm.
And that has to be the local solution to say, we don't want to be a community that is having this problem. And so we're going to address this head on. And what I would say as part of solution making is find a community who's doing it right and seek out what those structures are like. Seek out what services are being provided. Seek out how they're breaking down all the bureaucratic walls. Who can do what, who can't do what, who's not building, break all that down and get everybody together and say, as a community, we're not going to accept this, and we are going to build it, provide it, fund it, and we are going to solve this as a community. I've had actually several people on my podcast who have done that. There is a couple of people in Dallas who have done this very, very well, and several others who have said, we're going to create this continuum of support to solve this for our community. And they are seeing great results from that. I can think of a specific person who is Sarah Khan. She is actually out there doing it. And they are tracking the analytics of it. They're tracking the results of it. But it's got to be a community that says, we're coming together. We're going to plan it. We're going to create it. We're going to build it. We're going to fund it. And we're going to wrap around services to help the individual where they are. And the other piece is we don't talk about this a lot, but homelessness is a conditional moment. Once homeless, and once homeless doesn't mean you're always homeless. And we forget that. We forget that this truly can be a conditional moment. But to be able to find services, to find housing that can help them to the next phase, that can provide access, that could provide affordability, those pieces have to be there, and they have to be created from the local entities who want to solve this.
Yeah. Now, what about people who don't want help? I mean, I think because there are people who want help and seek help out, and then there's communities to help them. But when people are, when they are mentally incapacitated, or at what point, what are your thoughts on how we, as a community, create safety around that?
Yeah, that's I'm not a medical professional,
Yeah.
but there's a great Tunnels to Towers Foundation. They have a great program that are helping veterans who are homeless.
Oh, well.
And I highlight that one because it's one of the toughest and most transient types of population. And they are seeing amazing results in what they're building and what they're providing, because it's taking a very complex situation and having access to services, having access to housing. And I feel like Tunnel to Towers Foundation, if they can do it,
Anyone can do it.
right, with a very specialized and highly complex situation here. And if they can do it and solve it, then, and I think in Austin, they're just creating a brand new community that they've built. Then there's not, they've got the willpower, and they've got the funding that they're mobilizing to make it happen. So there's plenty of examples where it does work.
Yes.
Even if a person doesn't want to be helped, there's a core portion of a person that just needs to have the ability. And when you're in this situation day after day after day, and it's really hard for them to recognize that there truly is a path to move forward. And I think
Right.
that's where Tunnels Towers does a great job because, they're addressing the personal side of this as well.
Well, and absolutely. I mean, my community, my nonprofit that I help here in Hawaii, because I have an agency, is Boys and Girls Club. So I built them a website, and now I'm actually building them a new website this year. But it's really amazing when you hear that, they only charge like $25 a year, but that's too much for some people.
Hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, so we get sponsors and whatnot. But so when you think about that, like how much, and they really, it's about $2,500 per kid per year they need for this, after school program, and like trying to get them at least one meal, and some of these other
Wow.
really, really important things. And it changes lives, but that they're only asking for $25 from the parent, and that can be an unachievable amount, right? And I think it's just really now with how do we tell those stories to get the community to change their perspective, right? What is that kind of, do we need like a public service kind of campaign, or what are your thoughts on how we can make this more of a story people want to get behind?
So, it's interesting you mentioned Boys and Girls Club, and I'll answer that, but let me ask a question first.
Mhm.
When the kids come into that recreational center or wherever they're coming in, for the first time, describe what they're experiencing, because I have a theory here. Describe what a kid experiences. You know, th- yeah,
Well, at
just
the
tell
very
me.
beginning, yeah. So at the very beginning, actually, they're really. I remember one story that we did a story that really stood out to me was this one kid, and they first came, and they have set there's certain times where they have programs, whatever that daily program is, depending on what age they are, they have set programs.
Mhm.
But there's also other times where they just have like homework, or open hours. But at the beginning, it's kind of they more like are like letting the kid kind of get their bearings. And this one child, every single time they came, they would just go in the back room and just get in the corner and sleep, and they let him sleep, because it was. And then finally, after like a couple weeks of this, they started to kind of reanimate, and they learned that this was the only place that they felt safe sleeping.
Yep. Yep.
And so that was really important. And so that they're very, kind of respectful of letting there be this, what do they need right now?
Hmm. And
Yeah.
and that's the same type of situation when you have a person who's been, in experiencing housing instability. Everything is a threat. Everything is a risk. And it's really hard to mobilize to say, this corner, this house, this apartment isn't going to get taken away from me. And
Mhm.
so, we're talking about very, very core human um, desires to be safe and secure. And so, when you're trying to mobilize and find solutions, you have to look at that very, very basic core need. um, I think of Neil Brickfield with Pinellas County, Florida, and he was a podcast guest of mine, but he worked at the PAL Club, which
Mhm.
is a little similar, and he said that kids would come in and they knew when utilities were not getting paid and utilities were not getting and about to get disconnected, which meant the next step was eviction notices.
Oh, wow.
And so they would start to see them coming into these centers, bringing their things that they didn't want taken or left behind. And they would start storing them at these centers because the kids could predict the patterns of instability.
Wow. Oh, I got chills just now. That was crazy. Ooh.
It's something you don't even think about.
No, it's just like, but yeah, I mean,
Right. And so you start creating these cycles of instability. And this is just housing. I mean, there's a whole nother conversation when you talk about going from school to school to school, or food insecurity, or healthcare, lack of access to healthcare. But, we're just talking about housing here. And, Neil, great person, he painted the picture as to exactly what's happening here because the child is starting to see, this pattern creep into their life. And so then they have to sort of lock down and control what they can. And, having been there myself, I was like, yes, yes, this. this is the cycle that you start to get in. And, it wasn't until, I'm much older that I start to say, aha, I can recognize, hold on here. I can recognize that pattern is healthy or unhealthy. And then
Mm.
I can start separating them into the categories that I'm like, yeah, that's an unhealthy clamor for stability that is not a real risk. Or no, wait a minute. This is actually going to help me confront risk better because it pales in comparison to living in a tent. And so
Right.
there's,
I
I know,
mean,
like
yeah.
there's some real leadership skills that you can start to unpack once you're stable.
Yeah. So
Once
tell
you
me,
have the home,
so let's
right?
pivot on that. So now you're president of Quandel. Tell us
Yeah.
what do you do there, and then how have you used some of these early learnings on your day to day, leadership?
Great question. So, we are a company across the United States. We have people all over the United States. And so, what we do is we try to build stronger, compliant housing programs for housing authorities, for nonprofits, for developers, private management companies. But our premise is stronger compliance makes a stronger program, which makes a better housing policy. So if people are, if it's a housing authority, that's an easy one, and they're running programs for what everybody calls the Section 8 voucher, right?
Right.
That's
Sure.
that's
Sure.
that's the term that everybody knows. And so let's say the housing authority is maybe working on development. They're trying to build new, and they don't want to deal with a lot of administrative constraints about running a voucher program. So they'll hire us to come in and run it,
Mm.
and which means we're interacting with people who have vouchers. We're trying to bring their paperwork current. We're trying to make sure their units are inspected. So we're a compliance and consulting company, and it is one of the best and hardest jobs because, for example, we opened a waiting list for a client, and there were about 18,000 people that applied for about 300 vouchers.
Oh wow! And is this anything to do with what's going on in the government, or I mean, has we know when things have gotten cut? Is part of what's being cut?
No, this is just
Just regular. Wow. Okay.
regular course of business. Yes.
Jeez.
And but it's that imbalance. And so when I say, it's one of the best jobs because you're actually able to help, but you're not able to help to the scale of the need. And and we deal with the regulations. We try to interpret the regulations, make sure that we are a third party person who can come in and improve efficiencies, help with optimization, help make sure everything is running smoothly to really have better accountability and highly efficient programs. And that is great because that's a stronger program. You asked me earlier about how we get the word out, how we
Yeah.
talk about this, and there are several people who do a good job of storytelling in the industry, but sometimes it just stays in the industry. Like it
Yeah.
doesn't go out larger. And by human nature, we tend to hear when it's not working. We tend to hear, the horror story of when something didn't work right or somebody abused the system. And that is not acceptable. And that also does need to have visibility and transparency in that because we need to know how to fix it. We need to know how to prevent it. We need to make sure people aren't doing it, right?
Right.
There is a piece of that that does need to have its own lane, but there's also a bunch of stories when it did work.
Yeah.
And when you have people who are like, I've been on this program 4 years, it helped me. I was able to, get my education. I was able to have a stable job, stable address, keep my kids in school, and then they move on and they do better. Um, you know, people the statistics don't show when you move elderly, disabled, um, out of and the seniors, out of the numbers of people who are using affordable housing. The statistics show, depending on which report, you're about 70% of people are employed who are using affordable housing. But people think, oh, it's people in housing, who aren't working. Nobody's working. Nobody's working. That's not the statistics anymore. And that's just a dynamic of how much rent has increased to how many people are able to afford their rent to, high cost areas. And, you've got people who are paramedics, who can't afford their rent in the city that they're working in. So there's a lot of dynamic school teachers. We talk about school teachers
Absolutely.
a lot, but there are some great solutions happening. For example, there's a hospital in Tampa that said our nurses are commuting too long and too far. They can't afford their rents right here around this hospital. So they're taking empty parking lots and building housing that's workforce attainable housing for their employees. So you're
Nice.
starting to see people come into the fold who are like, we weren't really a developer, we weren't really building housing, but out of necessity, we're starting to have to be. And, that kind of, I'm talking
Yeah.
about,
Yeah. I mean, I grew up in Aspen, Colorado, so that's a very, affluent place, right? I
yes.
mean, back when I grew up there in the 80s, there was real people living there. Now
Yeah, yeah,
there's,
yeah.
but there that was a huge initiative back then because people
Mhm.
were actually working in the ski mountains and the
Yep.
restaurants, and they could not go down valleys. So there was a huge early push of creating
Yep.
this workforce housing
Even
there. And
even
yeah.
Steamboat Springs right
Oh
now
yeah, yeah.
has they've got a developer, who they had a private individual donate a bunch of land, and they have a collaboration going right now that's like, you know, the people who are working on the ski slopes can't afford to
Yeah.
be here, and we can't hire people, and so they've got a developer who's developing income-based affordable housing and offering it for workers in Steamboat Springs.
How about those printed houses?
The 3D
The
printed
3D
ones
printing, is that happening in America yet? Because I've
that
been seeing some of that in, I'm big into, so I do advertising, but I'm big into the solar industry. So I work with
yeah,
manufacturers and all kinds all over the world, and
yes,
a lot of them are now we're looking at getting these, solar on some of these printable homes because
yeah,
that's the number one thing that's going up is the cost of electricity, and it's uncontrollable without
yeah.
solar, right? So I was wondering what's happening in that.
There are a couple of venture capital firms that are actually creating affordable housing platforms that are focused on 3D printing. And so they are getting funding, they are mobilizing. There's also it's called Boxable. And it's out of, I believe, Reno, Nevada. And they are producing homes. They're not 3D printing, but they're producing homes that literally boxable, like it unboxes on
Wow.
site, and they're producing them at price points that are not even over 100,000. And so they're like, if you have land and utility, we can come in and put these units here. I mean, very, very creative.
Yeah.
There's even Evan Holiday with Holiday Ventures in Nashville, Tennessee. He just created a affordable housing community where they have solar panels, and so people, what is it? What is that? The necessity create was the mother of invention, I think, is what it
Yeah.
says.
Yeah.
Um, the dire nature of the affordability housing crisis is, hopefully necessity. We're seeing non-traditional players come into the industry who are doing these types of things. And with this Holiday Ventures one, I was talking about, he's taking it, and I think he has. I don't want to misquote him, but you can find him, Evan Holiday, Holiday Ventures, but Nashville, Tennessee. But I want to say that he has created um, the power that they're generating from the solar is funding some Tesla stations, and it's also 100% um, providing the energy for the clubhouse that's
Yeah.
on site. So, I mean, I'm like, some great things are happening in this dynamic of absolute need for affordable housing.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that I just wrote my second book about the solar industry because of the tax credits stepping down this year. And one of the things that came up in some of my research was really shocking for me is, about our elderly community and how just a couple years ago they did a study and they were asking them what they were picking between. And what we found is
Mm.
when it was between food or medicine, they were picking medicine, right?
Yeah.
Because they needed medicine. And recently, even just last year, when asked that same question, they were picking if it was, oh, your power or medicine. What are you picking? They're picking their power bill or their
Mm.
phone bill, right? Because that's the most important thing.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
accessibility. And so now we have a generation of people who are not getting enough food, not getting their medicines. And probably to your point here, the next thing on the chopping block is if, they could pay their cell phone, but they can't pay for their power, then they're going
Yeah.
to be homeless as well. So, what are the things you're looking for this year in 2026? What are the shimmering lights or what are you most excited about? And is there anything that we can do as a community to help, our fellow neighbors?
Hmm. They're calling it the silver tsunami. And it's just a fact of taking the age of people, what has happened and what the need is coming.
Mm,
And so there are many, many people who are talking about this silver tsunami effect that's about to happen, that is happening. And it's just the sheer volume of seniors that need affordable housing who don't have access to adequate retirement, who don't have access, who should be possibly living in the home. We have examples of where they don't have heat running or they have roof repairs and, like the home ownership isn't where they need to be.
right.
And there's not also access to funds to be able to provide for long-term care assisted facilities. And so there's this piece where affordable housing, senior housing has to happen and it has to be funded local, state, and federal. And it has to be built because right now what's built, the wait lists are so long for them. And so there is a supply drought at the same time of this silver tsunami happening. And we just have to have, as a community, the willpower to say, this is not acceptable for our seniors. This is not acceptable for our people with disabilities. This is not acceptable for our veterans. Like come up with your priority as a community and say, we're going to fund this. This is as equally more important, I would say, than certain types of infrastructure projects or so forth.
Absolutely.
And so, the communities just have, because, everybody wants somebody else to take care of this problem.
Yeah.
But the communities that I see that are doing it really, really well started at the local level. And so, I would say, you've got to have the local champion and the local level initiative to do it. Um, You've got Maker Housing, Maikeer, Peter Fari, and he's out of right near Aurora, Colorado area. He's right in that region. And he is one of what I would say is one of your local champions who really has said, our community is going to be part of the solution makers. And so there are people out there who are doing it very, very well and are trying to make a dent in some of this supply drought. And they're taking risks, right? I mean, these are development deals that they're having to try to build, and you know, eh, there are times when the general community doesn't want it built.
Right.
And I think that is even more heartbreaking. I believe, the community has a voice. Yes. Ask that it blends in with design. Yes. Ask that it has appropriate setbacks. Yes. Ask that, there are trees built around it. And so it doesn't look like a concrete thumb. Yes, community, do that. I think those are very fair expectations, but to just stand up and say, no, we don't want it just because it's affordable.
Yeah, Yeah, I mean that's
I-
so it's like you get to really think about like you leverage, the behavioral science of the future self. Like
Mhm.
if think about 10 years from now what your community is going to look like if these things
Yeah.
aren't in place,
Mhm.
right? What would you tell your future self, right? If you're going to let your grandmother like live on the street or whatever it might
Right.
be,
Right.
And
And standing up and right. I mean, saying no to new builds is pretty much, I mean, not to sound melodramatic here, but saying no to new builds is pretty much saying yes to homelessness.
right.
So, I mean, there's trade-off communities are having to make here.
Yeah, and I think that's really when I think about just the marketing of it or the public relations of it. It's like getting ahead and like finding those people who are like yourself and willing to share their story of how, getting that hand up and not hand out really changed their lives and the trickle down effect of that. And getting that being the lead story of what these communities are going to be. I did some work for when Stanford Medical Center, when they redid their hospital, I guess it was 10 years ago now, the community wasn't happy because
Mhm.
it was going to be 3 or 4 years of traffic. And
Mhm.
so they hired my agency to do like we did a community program around it. It was called
Yeah.
the change up, or it was for the whole community, and they may not see it now, but at the end of that program was going to be this cutting edge facility for children. And so I think it's more of how making people think larger about it, that it is what is the benefit going to be for everyone, not just the homeless, not just for, and that's the story that needs to be told. That's not being told
Yeah.
necessarily yet.
And I think, it's there are people out there who are talking about it. There are success stories out there. There are success communities out there. There are successful programs that are out there, but it's a little easier to just stay stuck and stay no as a community and try to ignore it and hope it goes away, but it's not going to. So, I mean, I tend to try to be an optimist as much as I can. And then just, think, the champions need to make sure that they have their other champions. What is that? There's like this, Viking phrase that's like, when all the short, all the, shields, they're all
Oh
work
yeah, the shield
together,
wall,
right?
a
You
shield,
know,
a
so
sheesh, like a shield wall.
yeah, right,
Yeah.
right. So like the champions have to make sure that they have that shield wall
Yeah.
together and have a have a lot of solutions, but working collaboratively with the community. But there's a lot of education that has to happen with the communities as
Yeah,
well.
and I think like to circle back, we called our campaign the Growing Together. That was the one we made for Stanford. But for just anyone who's listening, for businesses in general, one of the biggest things we can do is when you have an initiative, it's like let's say you get solar on your commercial building. Well, you don't stop there. You need to have an internal campaign to tell your employees we've gotten solar for you
Mhm.
for the building. It's because we want to, be able to hire more people with the money we're going to save. We're going to now put carports up so that the cars don't get hot. We're going to add electric vehicle charging right in the parking lot for you. Is then taking it and turning it around to your customer and talking about the economic and social governance standards and
Right.
how that matters, right? So it's like, well, I think a lot of times we're stuck in one view, right? But it's
Mhm.
like we got to talk to everyone around it, and then maybe more people will be open to it.
Yeah. It's amazing. One of the things, there's a industry organization that I'm on the board of, a National East Housing Association. And Denise Muha, shout out to her. She is amazing. And one of the things that she always tells us is that if a community is wanting to build and fund an affordable housing apartment complex, or whatever the design is, to ask your funders to come out to see what you currently have, or to come out to the ribbon cuttings.
Mm.
And she makes a point of always reminding everybody to say, get your decision makers out to see, what you have that's good, what you have that's needed, and at those ribbon cuttings where you've done it, because then you're starting to get buy-in from decision makers. And then I would also add to that is,
Yeah.
to find your local champions. For when you're going in the example you're talking about, find a group that want to have that there and bring them into your shield wall and start building those partnerships to make things happen. Because, you know, the um, the innovators, the pioneers, they are the ones who, years later, everybody's like, this was fantastic. This was fantastic. But when they were the first ones in trying to do it, they were not hearing a lot of it's fantastic.
That's
Um,
right.
we've got a historic theater, in the close proximity to where I am. And originally they wanted, it's an atmospheric theater. It's like only one of two in the nation.
Oh, beautiful.
It's beautiful, right?
Yeah.
Um, but it was in such a state of disrepair. They just wanted to tear it down. And it took two private individuals who said, no, we're going to restore this and we're going to raise money and, fix it up. And I think this was, I don't know, this was like maybe back in the 70s or 80s that they did it. And now it's like the whole entire area surrounds this. And you think, you know, people were just going to just demolish it and just write it off. And it was two private individuals who said, no, 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 we're fighting for this and we're going to keep this. And now everybody's like, oh, this is amazing. This is so part of the community.
Right.
So you just have to get those people who are going to champion that and push that through.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for being here. If people want to get a hold of you and get involved, how can they find you?
There is our company website at quadel.com. You can also find some links at katiegoar.com. It's Goar. I'm on LinkedIn as well. I post some Friday funnies most of the time on LinkedIn, and I open anybody to the conversation to join me on solution making, or just venting and dreaming about affordable housing too.
Well, I love that. Well, thanks so much for being here. And to all my listeners, please join me next week as I interview another industry expert and topics to help you succeed on and offline. Big mahalo. We are so close to 100,000 YouTube subscribers. So collectively, almost at like 120 with all of our different channels. And that is because of you and your aloha. So please continue to subscribe, share this content with your friends and family so I can get more great guests like Katie on to share their passion and vision with us. I will see you next week in the Pixels. Aloha. I hope you enjoyed this episode of the Covert Code Podcast. If you're loving the insights we share here, don't forget to follow us on your favorite podcast platform and leave a review. Your support helps us reach more digital innovators like you. Share this episode with your friends and colleagues on social media and help spread the word. And if you're in the solar space or just curious about where clean energy is headed, I'm thrilled to announce my brand new podcast, The Solar Coaster. This show digs into the real stories, trends, and challenges of the solar industry, with bold conversations and powerful takeaways you won't hear anywhere else. Follow the Solar Coaster now so you don't miss a single episode. Thanks for tuning in. See you in the Pixels. Aloha.